All right. My name is Michael Miarecki. This is my presentation on ether. So I go to the University of Florida. I'm currently at the University of Warsaw studying abroad. I study behavioral cognitive neuroscience and statistics, and I am in some way, shape, or form associated with SSDP, Shukrut Institute, the Polish Drug Policy Network, DanceSafe, and now IPN. So what are my inspirations for choosing my topic of ether? Well, in an attempt to relate psychedelics with my Polish heritage, I tried to talk to my grandpa about Polish drug usage, and he told me about his Lemko friend. Lemko being a people group in the south of Poland. They have their own language, their own culture, their own customs, so on. He told me that he used to drink ether. I didn't really know what ether was at the time, but then I read this book about a week later, and on page 2, this is Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, by the way, by Hunter S. Thompson. He said, "We had 2 bags of grass, 75 pellets of mescaline, 5 sheets of high-powered blotter acid, a salt shaker half full of cocaine, and a whole galaxy of multicolored uppers, downers, screamers, laughers, and also a quart of tequila, quart of rum, a case of Budweiser, pint of raw ether, and 2 dozen animals. The only thing that really worried me was the ether. There is nothing in the world more helpless and irresponsible and depraved than a man in the depths of an ether binge. And I knew we'd get into that rotten stuff pretty soon. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's get into that rotten stuff. Let's see what kind of trends we can identify and see how we can relate that to today's current climate. So I know that some of you purists are gonna come at me saying that ether isn't even a psychedelic, so on and so forth. Well, Dr. Humphrey Osmond said psychedelic means mind manifesting. That's how he defined it. Well, that doesn't really make any sense to me. That's way too subjective. And also, the Oxford Dictionary definition is also pretty subjective, just as hallucinations and apparent expansion of consciousness. There really is no way to define that. So let's move on to a chemistry definition. You guys got me beat here too. Indole structure, nope. Not a serotonin receptor agonist, no tryptamine backbone, no phenethylamine structure. It's definitely not a classic psychedelic. I get it. However, it does share some qualities of non-classic psychedelics, such as being a GABAergic modulator and an NMDA receptor antagonist, such as ketamine or PCB. So no chemistry, no literal definition. Let's go to the anecdotal. This is a newspaper article from about 100 years ago from France, but I think that their explanations are perfect. With each of his movements, he seems to be leaping into space. The etheromaniac lives in a perpetual tale of Edgar Poe. Since it begins by giving you truly voluptuous reveries, the golden dreams of Hindus, and all the hallucinations of opium drinkers, to then throw you into nothingness. That sounds pretty psychedelic to me. At least a non-classic psychedelic. Don't disqualify me, please. Let's move on to the pharmacology. So let's get into neurobiology, mechanisms of action. As I already mentioned, ether is a GABA A receptor modulator, GABA A though, and GABA being the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, which leads to hyperpolarization of neurons, which reduces neuronal excitability, which causes sedation, uh, anxiolysis, and altered consciousness. Similar things go on in the NMDA receptor when it's antagonized, also decreased neuronal excitability, which leads to dissociation, analgesia, and hallucinogenic effects. Moving on, it either has a very wide therapeutic index, meaning that its lethal dose and its effective dose are pretty distant from each other, which is ideal for anesthetic purposes. We'll get into that later. Addiction-wise, it's not physiologically addictive. There are no chemical properties that make it so. However, psychologically, it definitely is. There's a quick come down, no withdrawal, meaning like no hangover or nothing like that. And it's also, you can build a tolerance to it. And then the process of metabolizing ether, well, it's in the cytochrome P450 system. In particular, the CYP2E1 enzyme. And for those of you who are familiar with disulfiram, chlorzoxazone, sedatives, opioids, or certain sedatives, opioids, and anti-epileptics, I'd recommend against poly drug usage with ether and those substances because they can be enzyme CYP2E1 inhibitors, which could increase the toxic effects of ether when consumed together. But speaking of consumption of ether, how do you do it? You can do it by inhaling or ingestion. Inhaling, you can use various mechanisms made by anesthesiologists from over 150 years ago, such as this one. But then you could also do it through a medium, such as through a towel and inhaling it, pouring some ether on there, inhaling it like that. Or a very commonly known ingestion process called the three-step process, where someone takes a shot of water to cool their mouths down, then takes a shot of ether, and then chases that down with water. Or you could do it like my grandpa's Lemko friend with no chaser and no starter either, um, just straight up and then rapidly inhaling and ventilating afterwards. That also works. And there's a slight issue. Ether is very flammable. This is a chemical property of it. On top of the fact that it also smells really bad. But yeah, this has led to a couple of disasters, explosions, fires breaking out, many casualties. Ether is a pretty dangerous chemical when not handled properly. History. So I'm going to be talking about the history of the United States, Germany, and Poland in particular. So history as an anesthetic, this happened for the first time in the United States. The origin is debatable, but I mean, in fact, Dr. Crawford Williamson Long was the first person to perform a anesthetic surgery or a surgery using anesthetic, using ether, but he never really wrote anything down. He never patented it. He never really made it official. But William T.G. Morton did, and he actually took it so far as to try and coin lithium as his own anesthetic, which was really just ether with a couple of different smell masking ingredients added onto it. But people quickly caught on, and he was expelled from many medical rings of society by doing so. But why was ether used so much as an anesthetic? Well, it was very cheap. It and was pretty effective. It was so effective, in fact, that for over 100 years, it was used as the primary anesthetic. This first demonstration happened in 1842, and it was only replaced in the 1960s by fluorinated hydrocarbons, such as halothane. Then in America, recreationally, there are these things called ether frolics. These were like student parties where people would gather, dance, sing, get drunk on ether. Notably, Dr. Long, this guy that I mentioned beforehand, he attended one of these, and that might be where he got the inspiration for using ether. So now, German ether production in the early 20th century. We're going to go forward in time about 50 years. You have to remember that Germany at this time was a chemical, engineering, and industrial superpower. And it used ether for anesthetics, starting fluids, because ether has such a low flash point, which is at like -40 degrees Fahrenheit, that it's very easy to spark it. And it's a good starting fluid for many different machines. And chemical synthesis, solution or it's solute reagents, stuff like that. And it also had a pretty big cultural impact in Germany, this whole chemical manufacturing, so much so that the founder or that the creator of Curious George, who happens to be German, made Curious George get high on ether. Anyway, let's move on forward. Here's a little bit of a lesson on cartography. This is what the map looked like pre-World War II. This is what it looks like now. Pay attention to this border difference, Germany and Poland right here. This is it zoomed up in present day. And this was the path of ether smuggling. Then after some legislation, ether smugglers went through the Czech Republic into this area that we call Silesia. Here's another picture, Katowice, Opole, Rybnik. These are all three cities that are very important in this, that I'll talk about in the future. They're all very important. They're all part of the Silesian region of Poland. So what do we use to research? Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot of things to research left because a lot of documents and articles and archives were destroyed in World War II. However, what we have left is local police records, Silesian clerical archives, so like from churches and stuff, and newspaper coverage, such as this one right here. And why was ether so popular in Poland? Well, it was cheap, especially at a time where alcohol was very, very expensive. The tax on alcohol like tripled within 3 years, rising faster than inflation. Meanwhile, you can get more ether for less, and at the same time, it was more potent. It was better all around. Also, smugglers were making lots of money, bringing that from the more developed Germany into the lesser developed Poland. So Silesian jails were actually full of ether smugglers. Also, the Nazi Germany border police kind of turned a blind eye after Poland asked them to, keep track of these smugglers because we're kind of having a problem here. The Nazi Germany border police kind of just, let them go through. This was before World War II too. Gotta remember that. And then there were various types of legislation that were really just too little, too late, didn't do enough, and also were not very enforced, such as the Geneva Convention, which didn't even mention either. And then in 1923 and 1928, the Polish parliament government passed a couple of laws, but again, too little, too late. It was already, very common cultural practice. So for some perspectives on ether use. Well, this news article right here is called Villager, if you translate it, it's called Villages and Settlements in the Clutches of Ether Smugglers. And then they say young boys drink ether just like they drink vodka. If a stranger comes to the town Czyżowice or another ether village, he must bring a quarter of ether with him if he wants to dance with local girls. I think that just goes to show the cultural significance. If you're replacing alcohol at this point, yeah, this is some real deal usage going on. And as I said before, ether smells really bad. So they even, reported on how some villages near Władysław reek of ether vapors as strongly as an operating theater. And there's a lot of ether coming through over the border, about 1,000 to 1,500 liters of ether across the German border monthly. It's a lot. And these are only to certain towns, not all of Poland. So, ether use in Poland. What were the regional beliefs? Why did people do this anyway? Well, it really wasn't seen as a negative thing. It was seen as culturally acceptable. If anything, it was a cure-all treatment. This was being used by people from all different kinds of places, of all ages as well. This was very common among students, as well as minors, housewives. It was very cheap, of course, so it was a psychoactive substance that could get you drunk or intoxicated, really. And people would go to these things called kapliczki. This was like a slang term for like a house that you could go to consume some ether and have your own little ether frolic. And different villages serve different kropkas. Kropkas being different concoctions that you would make, whether it be some parts alcohol and some parts ether, or some parts raspberry juice, or some parts water and ether, and just different combinations. But that's what that means. So some research. There isn't a lot of research that was being conducted, but it's surprising to see that there was any even. But this guy, Kazimierz Hrabin, from 1933, he interviewed 3,500 pupils from a region called Pszczyna and found that 26% of those pupils, students really, were ether drinkers. And these percentages went way up when you went to a little bit more further out villages. such as Friedeck and Międzyrzece. Um, these places would have up to figures of 80 and 90% usage. Moving on. And this is a fascinating piece of research, great experiment. The Silesian Institute for Deaf Children in Lubliniec um, interviewed deaf pupils because they noticed that they were speaking to each other in sign about their ether usage. So what they did was they asked these pupils to identify certain smells, and they found out that 52.8 of them recognized ether. This is, general area, but it goes to show how culturally significant this was. So what happened? World War II, communism, the 1950s happened, 1940s and 50s happened. So what happened was Poland's border switched up a little bit. It shifted further westward. And with these new borders came new border controls, especially since Poland was now a little bit more tied to the Soviet Union after World War II. It made the borders very, very controlled, making the life of an ether smuggler very difficult, if not impossible. On top of that, alcohol prices got relatively tolerable. As we can see, Soviet alcohol exportation to Poland skyrocketed after World War II. And then communism. The factories that would produce ether in Poland were no longer able to produce it illegally or, put some off to the side and sell it because it was so centrally controlled. So there was nothing coming in from the inside, nothing coming in from the outside. What can you do? So people kind of just reverted back to alcoholism. As you can see, alcohol consumption also skyrocketed after World War II in Poland. So summary, what can we learn from this? Well, my biggest takeaway above all things is how important research is, especially that of lower socioeconomic groups. We know very little about ether consumption data-wise. We can only look towards anecdotal evidence, and there is very few of that remaining anyway. However, we do know that this was certainly a very big cultural phenomenon for at least 30, 40 years in Poland. And it's a shame that we don't know anymore. So we can cross-reference this with whatever trends are going on in America. We can learn some lessons from it. But anyway, what kind of place does ether have in our society today? Well, in a chemical sense, in chemistry in general, well, 100%. Ether is still very relevant. It is a useful solvent, especially in air-sensitive metal reactions. As an anesthetic, well, this is debatable because it's significantly cheaper, at least 10 times cheaper than any alternatives. And for developing countries, this could be very useful, especially, developing countries that have hospitals that don't have very developed anesthesiology programs. Relying on ether could be a viable solution. However, we cannot forget about its dangers. It's very flammable, very explosive, so on. Psychotherapy, absolutely not. People did dabble in researching ether-assisted psychotherapy, which yields one of my favorite phrases ever now, excitatory abreaction. You guys can check out Sagan and Charbon and Meduna in the 40s and 50s. They did some crazy research on ether there. What are my takeaways? Well, I got pretty close to my heritage in this one. I tied my fascination with drug policy with my Polish heritage, and that was great. Also, it's important to take away our role in redefining the meaning of a substance and what it means culturally. We're guardians, we're educators, we're pioneers in this field, and it is our job to define what substances are going to mean what culturally in the future. You also got to watch out for people who are trying to create their own lithions, capitalize off of potentially world-changing drugs. Further research, Ireland, huge ether movement happened there. Would love to go into that. Present day Estonia, it's still going on today in the Setomaa region. And then Czech Polish ether smugglers. Who are they? How did they do it? Why did they do it? Also interesting stuff. And finally, to quote the great Terence McKenna, thank you.